Compliance slows growth.
If you said to me, Dan, you're starting a logistics company today, what would you do on day one? As soon as I've got, a business that's, going to be actually generating some revenue, I'd be going, okay, now I'm going to get my compliance in a good place, because I'd rather start from a good position than try and fix it later. If you want to grow and you want to grow seriously, then taking compliance seriously is a really important thing to do.
If we've got a contract, we're safe.
Your contract is your first line of defence, but if it doesn't match the working practices, it will just get thrown in the bin. A system can be a good legal defence.
Yeah.
But the bit of it that people often miss the word is a robust system. And robust means it's been checked, it's been vetted, you understand how it works, it's suitable to the environment.
Yeah, and do you think that comes from a lack of understanding, or like compliance is naturally complex anyway?
The misconception there is that.
Welcome to Talking Wise, the podcast for logistics and self-employment.
And for companies that want to grow compliantly without the wheels coming off.
I'm your host, Chloe, and I'm joined by Dan, Deputy CEO at Wise. Dan, who's this podcast for?
This podcast is for businesses that are potentially looking to grow in 2026, but maybe have got caught up in a few misconceptions along the way.
And just a quick disclaimer, this is just our guidance, not legal or tax advice.
So we're going to give you super practical tips that you can implement in your business immediately. And following the podcast, if you do have any questions, you can find out how to contact us in the description or in the comments.
Ready?
Let's go.
Welcome.
Thanks, Chloe.
So you're here today to talk us through the misconceptions yourself and the customer-facing team here quite a bit.
Yep.
And set the record straight.
Yeah, definitely so. I think, we've been doing this now for 6 years, and you'd be surprised how many times the same things come up, the same misconceptions. And I'll be honest with you, we love it when people say, some of the things we're going to cover today, because it makes the job from a sales perspective super easy. So, when we get into particularly the contractual side of things and what people think they should and shouldn't do, I find it interesting, but then maybe I'm a bit boring. Yes, a bit boring. Yeah, just keep it a bit boring. So all good. So yeah, should we get into them?
Yeah. So the first one, and one that's quite familiar, that our sales team hear quite a bit, is they've got a passport on WhatsApp. They've been sent one. They're covered. Yeah.
So again, like you said, we get this all the time. It really is prevalent when, especially in smaller logistics companies, where perhaps it was originally, one guy that started out, and then he recruited, 3 or 4 of his friends to sort of join. And because he knows them, he thinks, oh, well, I know they're British, or I've seen their passport once upon a time, I'm covered. But when it comes to right to work checks in particular, it isn't necessarily that it's that you've got proof that and it doesn't matter if it's your brother, your son, someone you've known for 30 years.
Yeah.
If you haven't got proof that you've done that right to work check, it's the same consequences.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that people get quite confused on quite a lot. Why is it the document is not enough?
The thing with the right to work check is exactly that last word, check. So I know we've got a more feature length sort of podcast on right to work checks that we're going to dive into the detail on.
Yeah.
But having the right to work and having proof of a right to work check are two very distinct things. So what you're looking for with a check is that you've got a copy of the original document, and that someone has said, yes, I've seen this alongside the person, so I know that it's genuinely their right to work. So having a picture of it just isn't enough. You have to have an audit trail to sort of show that you've checked it and that you've followed sort of good process.
Yeah, and for businesses that only have the photo, what is the consequence of that?
I mean, look, this is one of those areas of the law, I guess, that can be a little bit grey. The black and white guidance is that you haven't got proof that you've done a check, that you can get fined by the Home Office. But I think it would depend on the severity of what you've done and, how the pattern of poor process that you've got as a business. But, it's a little bit like any investigation. You get the wrong person on the wrong day and you could get a big fine. But, if you've only got photos and you haven't got proof that you've done a check, the guidance that we would give is absolutely sort that out immediately, cover yourself, and go back through and do a right to work check today.
Yeah.
They're not going to say, well, where was it 3 months ago? As long as you've got proof that you've done a right to work check and you've got a date alongside that, you'd be covered. And
is it a sense of not those that haven't done it, it's a consequence immediately, or could it come in a couple of months?
Again, I mean, I'd be speculating if I knew for certain.
Yeah,
but it's often on the spot. So on the spot fine. And for some companies, you know, an on the spot fine from the Home Office of 40,000 and obviously subsequent 60,000, you'll shut a lot of companies down.
Yeah.
So not one to get wrong.
No. So the takeaway I'm getting from that is it's not the right to work document, it's the check that is the most important part.
100%. Don't get me wrong, you need the document. You can't just go, yeah, checked it, write check on a piece of paper. That ain't going to get you far. But yeah, you need the document and proof that you've done the check. Keep it secure. Don't have it floating around as a piece of paper on a desk somewhere. You know, have a good system for filing it, and make sure you've got accurate records. And also appreciate that if it's not a permanent right to work, that you need to recheck that right to work in the future as well.
Is that where people get caught out as well?
Yeah, people do get caught out on, oh, I did a right to work check and here's the proof, and it expired in 2025 on. Well, yeah, they did have the right to work, but you don't know now that they have the right to work today. So tracking the expiry dates of non-permanent right to works is also really important.
If we've got a contract, we're safe.
Yeah, so this is a great one. This is probably one of the ones that, the eyes light up when we hear this. Seldom have I known a company come to us with a contract and that contract be suitable. So I've had some absolute horror stories. Well, it depends what side you are. On our side, it's not a horror story, it's great news. But I've had, oh yeah, I got a contract, I've had it for years, and all my drivers sign it. And then they send it, and I'm like, yeah, send it over, I'll have a look. Send it, big bold black letters at the top, employment contracts. And clearly if you've got a self-employed driver, it's saying employment contract at the top. It's not the wording that you want.
No.
So a contract is not a silver bullet. Having correct contractual processes and procedures isn't a silver bullet either, but fundamentally getting the terminology correct is clearly important. And where status is involved, if there's any ambiguity, a bit like any court case really, ambiguity always goes in the favour of the smaller party.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about this as a judge in front of a big logistics company and a driver who's going to be using all the tricks in the book around I'm just a driver and I didn't understand. If their case is based on the fact that the contract you sent them said employment contracts at the top and they're trying to claim backdated holiday pay and sick pay, then I wouldn't fancy defending it if it's got employment contracts at the top.
So where do people go to set the clear distinction between the contract and the on the ground?
I think you got to start with, it's a really good question, because I think what you've said there on the ground, and you're showing your internal compliance knowledge there, Chloe. But the on the ground part is the super important part. So, one thing that we say to our clients is, your contract is your first line of defence, but if it doesn't match the working practices, it will just get thrown in the bin. So you need to look at your contract template. You need to say, okay, does what this contract says match up with what happens on the ground? So because what will happen if it's an investigation is I look at the contract and they may come in and interview some of your drivers and they might say, okay, what controls does your main contractor have in place? Mm-hmm. So, do they tell you what time to arrive? Do they tell you how to load your van? Do they tell you how to deliver your parcels? Do they tell you this? Do they tell you that? And, there's some that are reasonable. If it's commercial terms, then, they're perfectly fine. But what you don't want is for your contract to say one thing and for what actually happens say another.
Yeah.
Because, it's just like anything, right? If you're saying, oh, my contract's great and here's how I'm going to defend myself, and they turn around and go, well, none of this actually matches what happens, mm-hmm. then you can imagine why that would be difficult to defend.
Yeah, and for those that are listening that are thinking, oh, that sounds like me, my contract doesn't really match what happens, is it a quick fix for them to get things straight?
Depends.
Right.
Quick. It's fairly quick to get a new contract,
Right.
but fixing the sins of the past can be more challenging. And it depends. There's a few variables for that. So how long has the current contract been in circulation? How many drivers are you talking about? If you've got volume is not your friend in these circumstances. So if you've got 300 drivers that are potentially on incorrect contracts, rolling out a new contract to them, is a challenge. So I think what I would suggest is dependent on the number of drivers you're dealing with and, how long ago your contract was drafted. What I'd probably start with is, the contract itself, do a review of that. Does it match up with the working practices? So that's your first question you need to ask yourself. Because if you come out of that and actually your contract is good and it matches your working practices, then fine, you're on your way. But if you go, okay, well, this doesn't quite match up. So that's the first thing, can you get it redrafted? If it's fundamentally wrong, that's where it does become more challenging because there's potentially a re-education required at a driver level. So if, for instance, you are one of these people that's, gone to a high street solicitor and said the words potentially, I need an employment contract, because maybe you as the business owner haven't understood what you need, and Peninsula have given you an employment contract. They've done their job perfectly fine, what they've given you, but then you've used it in an incorrect scenario. Reversing that requires education at a driver level again, because really what you've got to make sure is that the people now that are going to receive the new contract understand the contract and they understand they're self-employed and all the sort of T's and C's that come with self-employment. So, sorry, that's a really long way of me not giving you an answer. It's case by case.
Yeah.
Smaller, easier, bigger, harder. But if your contract's good and you're big, you're fine. If your contract's rubbish and you're small, problems. So start of an audit would be my advice.
But whatever the scenario, it's worth to just review your contract, just confirm.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, which sort of an extension of what we've been talking about, is again something I always say to clients, new and old. Very, very rarely will you have a contract that is exactly the same as it would have been 12 months ago, because environments change, the requirements of your customers change, the commercials with the drivers change.
Yeah.
And what you don't want is self-employed subcontractors on evergreen contracts, because the longer they're on a contract, the more they look like what they call part of the furniture. So you don't want self-employed drivers feeling like they're part of the furniture. You want them to understand it's an engagement that can be ended at any point. So one of the things that we recommend you do is you get that contract re-signed at least every 12 months. And as part of the process of getting it re-signed, it's a good time to make changes to it and make sure it's up to date.
Yeah.
So contracts aren't a one job done process. They constantly need reviewing and amending and making sure that they're current, because again, you could have had a really clean, super compliant contract 2 years ago, and now actually your business has fundamentally changed. You've brought new depot managers in, new OSMs, the way that they treat and approach the drivers is completely different, and all of a sudden the working practices don't match what you drafted 2 years ago. So it's a constant iteration.
Yeah, and I know contracts obviously can be really confusing. How would you summarise in like one short sentence this myth?
Good question. How would I summarise it in one sentence? I think to reiterate what I said a moment ago, actually, which is contracts are a constantly evolving topic for any business. So, having a process to review those, even if you're sticking it in your Google Calendar or on your fridge, right? Don't feel like you've got one, you're covered.
Yeah.
Constantly be critiquing yourself almost and reviewing. So I guess the one liner would be have a process for contract reviews would be my sort of key takeaway. Don't think that you've done it and you can move on, because that isn't going to be the case.
Thank you.
MP.
I think then. Next myth.
Yes.
And when I read this, I thought it was a bit odd, but I think knowing our compliance services, but compliance slows growth.
Yeah. So again, common thing that we hear is that companies, I think sometimes when we start talking to them, especially if they're new businesses and they're starting off in logistics, feel like if they start putting process in place to make them, what we'd call gold standard compliance, that it's going to slow them down and it's going to cause them unnecessary aggravation. And you can make an argument for, well, it's work that they're going to have to do that they wouldn't have had to do. But I actually believe the exact opposite, which of course I'm gonna. But I think the reason I believe the opposite is, especially now, in the companies that we're talking to at parcel network level really value compliance. They want to work with compliant logistics companies. So it's a bit like us at Wise. When we're going for a potential new contract, they'll ask questions like, how do you approach security as a company? And I'll reel off one of my favourite sentences. Oh, yeah, we're ISO 27001.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah. We're ISO 27001. And you know what? Believe it or not, that answers like 15 questions.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, great. My data guy's going to be thrilled that you're ISO 27001. So I think I'm not going to go as far as to say, it's like ISO 27001. But if you get into conversations with a new customer and they ask you questions such as, do you have a contract between you and your drivers? And the answer to that question is yes. Then, it's going to be a lot better than no.
Yeah.
So I would say that compliance can supercharge growth. Actually, I think it's the opposite. And we've got lots of big customers that now will put slides in their presentations talking about compliance because they know that the recipients are interested in that stuff.
Yeah, and do you think that comes from a lack of understanding, or like compliance is naturally complex anyway?
I think sometimes people liken compliance to law.
Right.
And then people are fearful of the consequences of getting it wrong. So it's a bit like anything, isn't it? If you don't really understand it, then it's easy to get it wrong. But I think, it's not something that you should turn a blind eye to.
No.
I think just because you think you might get it wrong doesn't mean you shouldn't do something about it. So, and we're living in a world nowadays, and I'm going to talk Wise out of customers here, but we are living in a world nowadays where it's more accessible to find out information. So, you can, as you'd say, whack stuff into, Chat GPT and find out the answer. Now, depending on, how complex your compliance is, I wouldn't suggest that because it can be wrong. But I think if you're worried about almost stepping into it, do your own research and you'll find out pretty quickly that it's not something to be feared. But I would say my view on it is, if you want to grow and you want to grow seriously, then taking compliance seriously is a really important thing to do.
And on growth, does compliance matter more for businesses that are scaling, or is it the same across the board?
I'd say it's the same across the board. Don't get me wrong. If you've got one or two drivers, then clearly it's not going to be as important as if you've got 1,000, especially when you're talking at a process level.
Yeah.
But the consequences are the same. It's just shrunk by the size of your organisation. But scaling companies, if you said to me, Dan, you start a logistics company today, what would you do on day one? I would, well, maybe not day one because I'd need drivers and contracts first. But as soon as I've got, a business that's, going to be actually generating some revenue, I'd be going, okay, now I'm going to get my compliance in a good place because I'd rather start from a good position than try and fix it later. So I think, don't put it off, I think would be the message. Try and do something about it sooner rather than later.
And is there like a common crack that shows for those that are scaling in terms of compliance? Is it the same issue that repeats itself or shows first?
No, not really. I think, it depends on the environment that you're in and who you're providing services for. I think probably the most common thing is how you're communicating with your subcontractors. I'll keep using drivers as a term, but it can apply to any industry. And the thing that people get wrong normally quite quickly is the communication and the understanding of what you can and can't say.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to use the French that I normally use, but get yourself into work, and I'll usually add a word into that over WhatsApp to someone that's self-employed is not the right way to talk to someone. And, we've seen it in lots of quite famous cases. That can be the basis of a status claim, often revolves around communication, because then if you're communicating the wrong message, it leads to misunderstanding.
Yeah.
So I would say that the biggest thing people sort of get wrong is just how the environment that they're creating in their company, and that can be hard to reverse.
Yeah. Okay, so I think to set the record straight, it's not compliance that slows growth, it's the lack of compliance.
Yeah, actually that's a great summary.
Thank you.
No props. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, don't get me wrong, some business owners are going to be better at winning new customers and whatever else.
Yeah.
I think you still got to have some commercial acumen. But I would say once you're at the point where you can potentially win the business, I would say then yes, you're going to be way better off being a compliant business than being an uncompliant one. And we know, the companies that we're dealing with, again, at a parcel network level, they remove uncompliant companies. You might get in, but you won't last. So if you want to grow meaningfully over a long term, then yeah, getting compliance right is important.
Thank you.
No problem.
Next myth.
Yep.
I've got a system, so I'm sorted.
Yeah. And again, it sounds like a bit of a counterproductive thing for us to be saying. But, we come across businesses of all shapes and sizes, and some have made good investments into systems and process already. But a system doesn't necessarily mean it's the right system. So I'll give you an example. Again, the eyes light up when someone says, oh yeah, I've got a HR platform for managing my self-employed subcontractors. And if it's me or Simon Keys or anyone on the sales team, straight away I'm like, oh yeah, show us this platform, bring it up on their screen. Again, employee portal, for instance. We had, I won't name any names, but we had a prospect about a year or so ago who said, yeah, I've got a really great system, and they log in and they request their holidays on there, and I'm like, the alarm bells are ringing, and I'm like, yes, got on there. We didn't actually get them, to be fair, but the alarm bells are ringing, and what they'd done is they'd put an employee-based system into a self-employed environment. They had drivers going on requesting holiday. And straight away, one of the sort of key principles of self-employment is, or one of the key tests is lack of mutuality of obligation. All right, so put that in plain English. I don't have to provide you with work and you don't have to provide services. But you can understand why requesting holiday sort of is counterproductive to that, because if I don't have to provide you with services, then why would I be asking you to have a holiday? And then you're putting yourself in a super difficult position when it comes to a status claim, if you were to have one. Because if I was the driver, I'd say, well, of course I was employed, I had to request holiday. And then it's like, well, sorry, John, explain to me. I don't know who John is. John, explain to me why your drivers had to request holiday. Oh, well, I need to know that they were available to provide services or not. Okay, but do you not feel like that sort of strain into employment? Oh, well, no, because, they know they're self-employed. Well, do they? Because what we're here for, if that's the case. So I think I guess the point here is, we see this come up time and time again in legal advice. A system can be a good legal defence. Yeah. But the bit of it that people often miss the word is a robust system. And robust means it's been checked, it's been vetted, you understand how it works, it's suitable to the environment. So I guess the message would be a system is a good legal defence, but it has to be the right system.
Yeah, and in terms of the right system, why do you think people just choose an employed software?
They're you know what? And I'd sympathise for people. They'll probably go onto Google and type something fairly generic in. I need a way of onboarding, people, and it'd be loads of HR platforms that show up. And we know on the reverse side, having done the marketing for this business for 6 years, doing Google ads for onboarding for self-employed is impossible because no one's searching for it. No one's putting in onboarding for self-employed subcontractors because they don't understand that's what to search. Yeah. So I do sympathise with companies when they're first starting out because they don't necessarily know what they're doing's wrong, and they've got the right intentions. They're putting processes in place because they want to do the right thing, but it's unfortunately when it comes to the world of status, it's easy to get it wrong. It's much easier to get it wrong than get it right. And if you don't have the right guidance yourself and the right education, then you will put a HR platform in and you will think, oh, well, I need to know when my drivers can provide services. So, they're going to have to request holiday. And there's really easy ways of doing it in a compliant way, but it's only easy if you know.
Yeah, and even if they do have the right intention and it's just a lack of understanding, what happens if they get caught?
Again, it just depends on the severity. I think, normally, and this is what the issue is, people get caught almost too late. So they'll get caught at the point where a driver's gone to, a no-win, no-fee solicitor and said, I believe I'm employed. And at that point, it's too late. So the consequences can be, drastic.
Yeah.
They can be as bad as you have to reclassify your whole workforce. And that's happened. I mean, famously, it happened to, I won't say any names, but a very well-known ride-hailing company that everyone uses happened to them. And, I think it was 10 drivers that formed a group action lawsuit and said, we've been being treated like employees. And at that point, it's too late. So the consequences can be disastrous. But they can be also not disastrous. They can be, oh, yeah, sorry, I got the terminology wrong, and you can fix it.
Yeah.
But, again, it comes back to the previous point, actually. Bigger you are, the harder it is to sort of fix. And the degree of bad also depends. If you've been doing everything employee style, employment contract, holidays, sick pay, if all that's embedded, then that's a more difficult position to row back from.
So similar to contracts as well, if it's that in the system doesn't match what's happening on the ground, it's just a massive risk.
Yeah, it's a massive risk.
Yeah.
Absolutely a massive risk, yeah. So, and we've had, to be fair, we've had clients come to us that use ancillary systems and, we've educated them and they've even got the systems to change their terminology.
Oh.
So I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name, but Jamie from EcoDrive, he uses a system. He actually come to us and said, can you review it and work out whether this is a good system for my business or not? I looked at it functionally, it was great. I'm not going to promote them podcast. That's advertising. But I looked at the system, functionally it was great. There was a few things on there that we were like, oh, Jamie, be careful with these.
Yeah.
And he actually went back to them and got them to switch off certain bits of the system to make it super compliant.
Love that.
Yeah, great, yeah. Good lad. I mean, he's a Man United fan, that's the only downside. But other than that, he's all right.
Thank you.
No problem.
Last myth.
Yeah.
And I think this is quite a classic one. We'll sort it when we get bigger.
Yeah, you know what? Sort of a combination of everything we've said, really, which is the misconception there is that there's a few ways you can interpret that misconception. One will be, oh, it doesn't matter, we're only small. No one's going to care about us. That's first misconception. And then the other one is, well, once I've got a bigger business and more finances, I'll employ someone to come in and run this correctly for me. And you know what? You can make a case in your mind for both of those things. But the consequences, if you're small, they're almost representative of your revenue as well.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if you're 100 subcontractor organisation and you have 10 right to work fines, that's a pill for you to swallow. But if you've got 10 drivers and one gets one, it's the same ratio effectively. So, and it's going to hit you maybe harder because you haven't got as much margin, because you haven't got as much profit in your business. So I think the first part of it is, I think it's actually probably more disastrous for a small business than it is a large one. In a way, don't get me wrong, if you're a small business, then you could argue that you haven't got as much built up in it and it's easier to shut it down and sort of move on. But, you don't want to be starting from scratch every 2 years because you didn't invest in it in day one. And then I think the other side of it is, when we're bigger, we'll have more money, so we'll invest more into it. Yeah, that's logical, right? Wise, we've improved things as we've gone, but we made sure that we got the fundamentals right originally. And, I know what it's like, and I've worked in businesses, especially when I was on the agency side, where you go in, and I'm talking low risk stuff because I'm doing like marketing campaigns, and they've had, let's say, an AdWords campaign running for 5 years, and they're spending £100,000 a month on it, but no one's been maintaining it. And you look at it, and in 10 minutes, you've shaved £30,000 a month off their budget. And they're like, oh yeah, well, we didn't want to invest in it because it wasn't a good use of money. Well, wait a sec, I just saved you 360 grand a year here. So I think for me, waiting until you're bigger is, in your mind, sometimes feels logical, but seldom actually is a good idea in practice.
And do you think it comes from people get scared that the processes slow them down to begin with?
Yeah, I think probably does come from that. And also I think it comes from a little bit of, oh, well, we're small, so no one will notice.
Yeah.
But I think, and you're right. I mean, like, bigger organisations are clearly going to get a lot more heat than smaller organisations. But what you're gambling on really there with that sort of ethos is luck.
Yeah.
Luck that you don't get caught. And you never know who's watching you or who's thinking, I know that Chloe doesn't do right to work checks on her drivers. And, unfortunately, there's a bit of people out there. So just because, you're small and you might think you're going under the radar doesn't mean that, you can't get caught out. So again, the guidance here would be try your best not to wait and try and get the fundamentals right. And you don't have to have tons of fancy systems and thousands of people working in compliance to get it right. But as I said before, easy to get it wrong, slightly more difficult to get it right, but in the long run, it's going to save you a lot of time and hassle.
And I feel like with this myth, actually all the myths, consistency is key. It's not just a one-time thing.
Agreed, Chloe.
Consistency
is key. Consistency definitely is key. It's it's the same for any business, right? I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything that we've ever done as a company, we've said we're going to do this and stick to it. I don't know what you're laughing for, but you don't always do what you say you're going to do.
Yeah.
Always consistently. But again, what I would say, some things are not worth not being consistent on, if that makes sense. So I'll give you an example. From a Wise perspective, we always do our ISO 27001 audits. There you go, a little ISO mention again, slip that in again. We always do our KYC of customers. We always make sure our VAT returns are filed. We always make sure our accounts are on time. The stuff, we always do penetration tests from a cybersecurity perspective. So these are things that we're consistent on. We never skip. And then the fluffier stuff, like organising staff socials, maybe they slip through the cracks.
The fridge being full.
Rude. Unnecessary. The fridge being full, which is a perk, not a mandatory requirement. So I'm not going to get hung out to dry on the clean Pepsis in the fridge. Advertising. You are. You're right. Consistency is key, and being consistent on the things that matter are also key.
Okay, and to summarise, set the foundations first, and then they scale.
If you can, yeah, absolutely. And again, it is difficult because if you're a brand new logistics business, no one's looking at you, so they don't necessarily know. Actually, funny enough, I'm talking to someone at the moment who's starting a brand new logistics business, part of the AM David Lloyd crew.
Oh God.
And just free advice, basically, in the gym in the mornings. Why not? Why not bother me while I'm doing leg press? Got to do legs, Chloe. All right, don't skip leg day. All right, you don't want to be that. Don't be that person. It's actually the opposite for women, isn't it? They never skip leg day. Well, it's normally the other way around. Yeah. Anyway, moving on. But he's setting up from scratch, and because he's got the benefit of just coincidentally knowing me, he's asking me questions like what I should do, and I'm saying, well, you should do this and that. But that is very almost fortunate from his perspective.
Yeah.
But what I'd say is, if there is anyone listening that's just starting off in logistics, or they've got 5 drivers, or they've got 10 drivers, get the foundations right now while it's easy to put them in place.
Yeah.
Don't think to yourself, I'll wait till I win the next contract and I've got 20 drivers, because that is gonna, be harder work.
Yeah. Okay, and to summarise and finish the podcast, for someone who does nothing else this week, what are the 3 actions you'd say for them to do?
Okay. 3 actions that I would say do this week. I think
Off this podcast.
Off the back of this podcast,
not
of course.
Just in general.
Not just in general. Go supermarket. Make sure you paid your gas and electricity bill. Look after your kids. 3 things that I would do. So I think first thing is, if you haven't got a contract in place, start that process. If you have, do an audit of that contract. I think second thing would be really topical at the moment, and like we said, we're going to do a full podcast on it. But if you're not up to date on your right to work checks, then make sure that you're doing that and you've got those in place. And I would say the third thing is, if you're serious about growing in 2026 and you don't want the wheels to come off, quote TM, then invest in compliance sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Because I think as the regulatory changes that we can see coming down the track, making tax digital for self-employed drivers, the right to work legislation, this compliance piece is going to become more and more important for businesses. So if you're serious about growing, start now.
Good to know.
Thanks, Chloe.
I think that's
Is that
it.
the end?
Yeah.
Another one in the bag. See you next time.
Hopefully.
I'll get the drinks in the fridge as well, don't worry.
Yeah, then I'll be here. It's
Okay,
fine.
great. Yeah. Okay, perfect. See you later.
Bye.